tell me some of the use cases that you have handled utilizing data, trends, and how it has impacted the business?
Data is the lifeblood of every organization. We have tried very hard for lots of clients to bring that data together to be able to tell a story. Probably the best example is for Samsung.
Where we need to exactly work on in order to meet the goals and meet the KPIs and how it is working.
The data strategy is becoming increasingly important to make sure that we are architecting things properly. We've got the owners in place, we've got governance around those different sort of entities.
So how it will gonna impact the customer experience, advertising sector, marketing sector, and what will be the business biggest opportunities that can come through the evolution of AI?
It's a big disruptor for lots of industries. We've realized now that that's not the case. So we are certainly having to change. We're having to be much more comfortable with those things.
Hello, James. Welcome to the Executive Outlook.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right. So I'm very excited to know that you are been working from last 25 years into the data and AI area and into the corporate world. So what inspired you to choose this career and how your journey has been?
So I think what inspired me really, I was actually good at maths when I was at school. And when you're good at something, I think you very often find that that's something you quite enjoy. So I just kept going, and it was something that I went on, and I started in medical statistics, so actually working in clinical trials, but felt that was a little bit too strict for me. So then I moved into marketing, advertising. The same skill sets in direct marketing at the time were very much transferable. So it was test and learn, test and control groups, and able to sort of use that. And then over the last 25 years in advertising, that's grown. And of course, as you sort of say, AI has been something that's certainly become more prevalent. And the capabilities, the computational power that we now have enable us to do very much more. And we're sort of in a much more ever increasingly exciting place with the types of things that we are able to do. So yes, it's still very exciting.
As you mentioned that you have worked in marketing area, advertisement area. So if you want to do the marketing sales, and if it will be data-based decisions and data-backed decisions. So can you tell me some of the use cases that you have handled in this area, utilizing data, utilizing the trends, and how it has impacted the business?
Yeah, data and analytics has been important for a long time. I mean, data is the lifeblood of every organization, really. The problem is that very often it sits in various different places, different silos. It can't always be accessed. So we have tried very hard for lots of clients to bring that data together to be able to tell a story. Probably the best example is for Samsung in Australia, in this market, where we've brought lots of first-party data together. We've orchestrated it with various other different data sources. We have lots of different analytical work streams that just give clarity to some of the ideas that we have. They support, their evidence-based. We're able to then justify some of the decisions we're wanting to do. We're able to recognize where there are opportunities or where there are gaps and, sort of areas where we need to improve. So a lot of the work that we do, we can sort of support, we can have evidence for that. And I think that for marketers now and the economy, and it's every company, every industry, I think is probably sort of having the same thing, but justifying and sort of having that confidence that the opportunities and sort of where that return and sort of showing that there's evidence in their work, how it's performed and what it's contributed to the business is increasingly important. So then that data sort of, I suppose, goes full circle and actually closes the loop. So it's not just creating and identifying the opportunity, it's understanding how the performance has gone. And then obviously, that leads into sort of, well, what could we do better next time? So circle therefore.
With the analytics and you are improving and then reapplying the strategies, what you are thinking with a twist and then again measuring it with data.
Absolutely. And, optimization is a word we often use. I think the wonderful thing about optimization is that we can never really reach it. So it's always this, there's always going to be an opportunity to improve something, to make something better, or to at least find out why that's going to make a difference and by how much. So yes, there's always something to do.
I'm very curious to know about the business use case. Like, For example, I have worked in marketing, and what was a business use case to do the personalized based marketing. For example, analyzing the users who are about to quit the subscription, for example. So we were understanding, okay, how many times they were clicking on the button for cancellation and they have not cancelled it. That means we are analyzing that, okay, they're about to cancel, and we can give the personalized offers to them so that they can continue the subscription. So this was one of the business use case. So any business use case you want to share with the help of data that you have solved and how it has impacted the business.
Yeah, of course. So there was a good example that we've got that we very often talk about for our T20 World Cup, the Cricket World Cup that happened for the women's event back in 2020. So it's just before COVID really hit in the world. But the way we ran that program was we forecast what the ticket sales would be for every single match in the build up to the actual event. And the end goal was ultimately to fill the MCG, which is Melbourne Cricket Ground, with the final and make sure we had the biggest women's sporting event populated. But what we had done is we'd understood and we'd forecast out each and every single match and knew what the ticket sales were going to be at any moment in time out from that. That meant that we could essentially understand if we were pacing behind or ahead of where we were expecting to be. We could also start to understand if we were pacing behind, what level of investment we needed to do and where that investment should go as well, because we knew the types of audiences that would be buying tickets at that time. We knew the channels that they would be buying in and so on and so forth. So we could build all of that capability. We also knew sort of markets, populations, audiences that we wanted to go to. So was it worth us actually, for example, smaller game that maybe, I don't know, Afghanistan versus Holland or something, to sort of lesser cricketing nations would need to have an extra amount of incentive to get people into the grounds because we wanted the atmosphere. That was the most important thing. Whereas India versus Australia, we didn't need to do anything because it was going to be a big game anyway. So there was all of those different parameters that we were then able to build in. But it just meant that the event obviously was really about the people, about the sort of the festival and everything. And we were able to sort of plan accordingly. So data was absolutely integral at every moment of the journey. We knew where we were going. There was transparency about the clients and the people who were part of the Australian Cricketing Board, and we were able to understand, were they meeting KPIs, were they on target? There wasn't any sort of questions. The data, we all knew what the numbers were, so we could talk about the solutions and we could talk about what the requirements were and what we needed to do, rather than just have this moment on a Monday morning where for the first time you find out that sales are down and you didn't realize that. Everybody knew every single step of the way how we were performing. So that was a really good example.
Yeah, I think that is giving so much insights and where we need to exactly work on in order to meet the goals and meet the KPIs and how it is working. So that gives you an insight. With this, I want to understand, as we are moving towards the database decisions and you have shared few stories and case studies, right? So can you tell me what are the major challenges we face when we work with data and which you have solved it? That was a major problem, but you have solved it with the help of certain frameworks or strategies that I'm very interested to know.
Yeah, well, sometimes they sound rather dull, but the data strategy is actually really, really important. And I think that increasingly, as we talk about privacy and as we sort of want to know around sort of, the sort of the ethical way that we're using data in models and so on and so forth, the data strategy is becoming increasingly important again. So once upon a time, it was pretty basic. It was just making sure we could get data from one place to another and we could actually use it and work with it. But now we've got to make sure that we are architecting things properly. We've got the owners in place. We've got governance around those different sort of entities and all sorts of bits and pieces. So that is certainly becoming increasingly important requirement. The other reason I think that we are seeing a lot of these cases come up is that companies have spent a lot of money, software products, licenses, things that they've bought, systems that they've bought, that they can't get to work properly. And very often the difficulties ultimately come from the fact that data can't be moved from one place into those different environments to be activated. So the dream of what those solutions can provide is wonderful, but really the reality of getting that sort of stuff in the right place for the right sort of capability is more difficult. So lots of frameworks, robust frameworks, governance sort of criteria, ways of working, RACI models, roles and responsibilities are sort of put around those those different places, those different environments to make sure we can activate the data. So they are increasingly becoming important. As I said, it feels a bit old-fashioned. It feels like it's sort of, stuff that's the basics, but you have to get the foundations right in order to be able to do that. And as we're starting to sort of see models getting more sophisticated and wanting and having a thirst for more data, we need to make sure that we're building those capabilities in, bring that sort of structure in place.
Suppose anyone very new in the business and they want to set up the data infrastructure. So you mentioned the foundation should be right. So what should be their first step to create the data infrastructure and how they should be doing it, and where they can identify that this is a problem of data, and the identification is the first key, right? So how they can identify that this is the time you should invest on the right infrastructure, governance, data owners, you should have a dedicated data owners. So when that situation arises in your experience?
Yeah, so I think the important thing is that a discovery session to sort of understand where and things are, a requirements gathering, I suppose you might call it. Discovery sometimes can be a little bit frightening, but yes, if we do requirements gathering, sort of understanding all the bits and pieces that are around. I mean, invariably, you're reaching that, or you're going into that knowing what you're wanting to achieve. And so then you can start to identify the data that you're wanting. Whereabouts does it sit? Does it even exist in some instance? And if it does, is it sort of something that you hold of consistently in terms of its format, in terms of also the timeframes that it's released and updated and stuff like that. So that whole process is really important. I think that, yes, as I sort of said, you're going into that knowing, or ideally knowing, what you're wanting to achieve. So they then become sort of a clarity around the metrics that matter is how we sort of frame it. So you're starting to sort of recognize the bits and pieces that are really going to be important to the business. And they should be metrics that do genuinely impact the business. There's lots of things. Advertising is probably one of the worst places where vanity metrics and, how many click-throughs and stuff like that have been achieved, when really click-throughs don't actually mean that much to the business, potentially. It's sales is what's really going to sort of be the important thing. So conversions is what we need to be looking at. How do we get hold of that data? So yes, you've got to make sure you get the metrics that matter. And then I'm a big believer in getting these things socialized as quickly as possible. So the more you can actually get some of those, that information into an environment, a dashboard is obviously a traditional place, but any sort of visualization where that information can be socialized, people then are talking about the numbers, people are interested in that sort of data. It's amazing, people assume or think that they're actually sort of not very good with numbers. They don't know data, but everybody knows that their football team is beating another football team because they've scored more goals. So they know about data quite naturally. So I think that as you start to show that, as you start to socialize that information, people have questions about it, which is great. It's not just sort of a dismissal of it. It's not just frustration at the fact that they don't have the knowledge. They've now got the information. Oh, okay. So what, is that a bigger number than yesterday? What does that mean compared to where we were last year? And that's a good thing. You're starting to get people interested in that. And that starts to get you the backing, the sort of the extra effort to start to sort of release more funds to be able to go and that to sort of satisfy those questions and get answers to those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned about advertisement. I want to ask another question. AI is changing. So how it will gonna impact the customer experience, advertising sector, marketing sector, and what will be the business biggest opportunities that can come through AI as an evolution of AI?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a big disruptor for lots of industries. I think creativity thought that it was immune to the disruption for a long time. But of course, we've realized now that that's not the case. So we are certainly having to change. We're having to be much more comfortable with those things. But I think that what we just need to make sure is that we're all working with these tools as much as possible. And we are in our everyday life. The adoption rates are huge. But in our professional lives, we need to be making sure that we are working as hard as we can with them. We have recently embarked on the process of qualifying ourselves to have the ISO certification, so the International Security Standards sort of certificate in the AI space, which I think is important because then that shows that we have practices and processes that are correct around these. Obviously, we don't want to have any issues with sort of legalities and things like that. The thing with AI, the tools are one thing, but what it's doing is it's changing the ways that we're thinking in our workflows. And so there are processes that we've had ingrained into us for many, many, many years that we just have to change. So an example the other day, we were working on taking a still image and making that move. And then that was going to be just a shot or an element or a frame in a video. But then we have to have the conversation about the talent and the photographer who's taken that. And what does that mean from our contractual side of things? Those are sort of the elements and the conversations that we're now having that are very much disrupting, as I said, the processes that we've had for many, many years that sort of not had to think about because it's just been naturally ingrained into us, that we now have to have. And I think that that's a challenge, and that's something that we're having to get used to. So as we've got data sitting everywhere, I think lots of that information is in PowerPoints or in PDFs or email attachments of those documents. How can we make sure that we're sort of surfacing that information back? We're not having to replicate experiments. We're not having to do the same piece of work again, but we're also having the ability to find that information very quickly. So there's lots of capabilities there that we're starting to look at. And again, it sort of changes the processes around how we store stuff and what sort of things are being utilized and stuff. So yeah, there's lots of disruption. It's incredibly exciting, exhausting as well, if I'm being brutally honest, because there is so much to do, but it's great.
Absolutely. So this is a trend of IT also. So after 5 years, there's a disruption that comes. The new things comes into picture, and we have to think from different perspective, and we have to upskill ourselves to start utilizing those technologies, and then we get used to it, and then new things come in the market. So I think that is all. Thank you so much, James, for sharing your journey and insights on achieving data and how you are shaping the business outcomes and driving the innovation. It's been pleasure having you on the executive.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to talk to you about all of these things.